Hi guys, here's a little refresher for you in terms of working with integers and the 4 different operators that we generally use in math, adding, subtracting, multiplying, and dividing. Considering the fact we're using negatives here, not much changes. I would tell you this, as a matter of fact, contrary to belief, you might call this a paradox, multiplying and dividing are actually easier with negatives or integers, negatives and positives, than addition and subtraction, and that's because you don't have to think as much. So actually I'm going to start over here with products and quotients, and I'm going after these first because of the fact that I know that when you multiply or divide, because those are just opposite operations, when you multiply or divide two things that have the same sign, your answer is always positive. When you multiply two things that do not have the same sign, they have different signs, you get a negative product or quotient. It's as simple as that. One way we've gone over in class to help us remember this is to come up with this little mnemonic right here. I draw 2 double bars there and like this. You might remember this, you might not. It's really kind of cheesy, but here's what it says. You put a plus and a minus, a plus and a minus. This is kind of like a Cayley table is what we call it. It's named after mathematician Arthur Cayley. But I look at this and I say, okay, think about the Old West movies. They're really dorky. But here's what we'll consider this, okay? We call a plus on the left side here the good guy, and the negative, of course, the bad guy. And this positive over here we'll call rides into town. This negative right here we'll call rides out of town. And so here's where we start to get this table, kind of like a times table. We say, okay, what if a good guy rode into town? That would be a good thing. So in other words, a positive times a positive is a positive. And I'm going to go ahead and go down this main diagonal here because I know this is positive also, and here's why. What if a bad guy rides out of town? That's a good thing also. So here's what I want you to see. When they have the same sign, it always yields a positive product or quotient. If they don't have the same sign, you start to look at it this way. What if a bad guy rides into town? That's definitely a bad thing. And what if a bad guy, or excuse me, a good guy rides out of town? They let the bad guys have all the fun. So that's a bad thing. That's just one way to remember it, but I'll tell you what. When we're doing these types of problems, the very first question I'm going to ask myself is this. If I'm multiplying or dividing, bottom line is this. Do they have the same sign or not? Because here's the good news. Multiplying, it's the same thing it's always been. Look, 3 times 8 is going to be 24 no matter what. The question is whether your answer is positive or negative. So I look at this and I say, well, look. You're going to get 24. Question is, what type of a 24? Now, I didn't have to write a plus sign here, but if I don't, by default, we say it's positive. Some people are more comfortable writing in a plus sign, but question is, did they have the same sign? Answer is, no, they don't. So here we go. You have a negative product. They did not have the same sign. Now, look at something like this. What if they give me 3 factors in the product? Well, we can whine about it, but I'll tell you what. 8 times 1 is 8, and that times another 1 is still 8. Good news is, and I'm not going to give you partial credit anymore, but looking at this, 8's the product. Question is positive or negative 8? Well, you got to work left to right. I'll ask you this. Negative times a negative. Rule of thumb is that a negative times a negative is just always a positive. And of course, a positive times a positive is a positive. But here's why. Did they have the same sign? Yes, they did. So they have a positive product. But once I got that positive 8, I took that positive 8 technically. We can write that up there. Positive 8. Times a negative 1. 8 times 1 was our 8, but look at this. These did not have the same sign. This is a negative 8 for a product. Now, of course, these are just examples. These are not off your sheet, but let's just bury these real quick. Look, 20 divided by 4, it's 5, okay? But these had the same sign. Positive 5. How about 100 divided by 2? Totally 50, but I look at this and I say positive divided by negative. They don't have the same sign. This is a negative quotient, negative 50. Okay, that being said, I'm so glad to be done with multiplying and dividing because, as a matter of fact, I think it's boring and you probably do as well. Now, here comes the tricky part. I don't say it's really that tricky, but addition and subtraction. And actually, the good news is this. I'm only going to ask you to know how to do addition. And I know you're thinking, what do you mean? We don't have to do subtraction? Yes, you have to do subtraction, but you're going to find out in a minute that subtraction is really the same thing as addition, just the other way around. So we'll talk about this. Let's look at addition first. The best thing in the world is when you add 2 things that have the same sign. Different set of rules than over there. But think about negatives as being in debt. And what if I ran this situation by you? You owe me $3, and now I'm putting that together with another $10 you owe me. Now you owe me $13 total dollars. Another way to think about this is with our chipboards. We said this was 3 red chips. We're putting that together with 10 more red chips. Total, how many do we have? We have 13 of those red chips. So bottom line is, when you put negatives with more negatives, you get a bigger negative. When you put positives with more positives, you get a bigger positive. Now look at something like this, and what would happen if you have two things that don't have the same sign? Two ways of approaching this visually would be draw a number line. You start at 0 and you say, okay, I'll take 3 steps to the left, and I'm going to label that. And from here, I'll put that together with, you don't start back at 0, you start where you left off, you take 10 steps to the right. One thing that becomes quickly apparent is that, well, your answer's right here, is that you took 3 steps to the left, but then you took 3 more steps just to get back to 0. In other words, 3 of these negatives canceled out with 3 of these positives, and there were 7 extra steps to get us over here to this positive 7. Okay, so you know what? This does come out to be more positive. I will point out this. When you add a negative and a positive together, bottom line, things are going to cancel. And whichever number had a bigger absolute value, or was the furthest from 0, remember absolute value means its distance from 0, in this case positive 10, your answer is going to have the same sign as that number. Just to prove this to you, check this out. What if this were a positive 3 and this were a negative 10? I'd say, well, we're adding two things that don't have the same sign. Okay? So 3 of these are going to cancel out with 3 of these. It's just going to happen as a reaction. They're going to be 7 left over. But my question was, what was the bigger number? Well, it was 10. What was its sign? It was negative. There are going to be 7 negatives left over in that situation. Okay, that being said, we talk about the situation of debt. Now, wouldn't it be great if I came along and I took away money that you owed me? The question is, wouldn't that be the same as me giving you money? So here's the deal. You put a ding in my car, and I say, well, it's $100 to fix that, but I'll tell you what, I'll let you work it off. I'm not going to necessarily give you money, but if you come over and you mow my yard this entire summer, I'll let you work off, say, $70 of that debt. Okay? Now, I didn't necessarily give you $70, but it was pretty much the same thing. This could be kind of represented by this situation. Now, I know, or excuse me, this situation down here. Let's start with B because that's what I just brought up. I say, all right, negative 4 is kind of like what you have. You owe me $4. But what I'm doing is I'm taking away negatives, and the big question is taking away negatives good? You say, yeah. Is taking away negatives the same as me giving you money? Well, yeah, kind of. So I look at this and I say, okay, negative 4, take away 2 negatives is the same as me saying negative 4, adding 2 positives. What I want to point out is this. The moment that I change this subtract sign to an add sign, I change the sign on the second number. Hence this little mantra we use in class, which is this. When you subtract, you add the opposite. One thing they just don't want to tell you in little elementary school is that there's no such thing as subtraction. It's really adding negatives. They just don't want your little heads to explode. So we look at this and I say, okay, negative 4 plus positive 2, now this is addition. And I say, do they have the same sign? Of course they don't. So 2 of these are going to cancel out with 2 of these. All right, there's going to be 2 left over. The question was, which one had a bigger absolute value? Well, negative 4 was furthest from 0. So it's going to be further to the left of the number line. This is a negative 2. Now I look at something like this. I say, well, how am I going to add the opposite here? I'm totally going to change it to add. I say, what's the opposite of positive 2? Duh, negative 2. So I look at this and I say, okay, negative 2. Oh, and good news. You're putting negatives with more negatives. You're going to have a pile of negatives, and you're going to have 6 total negatives. Okay? So keep this stuff in mind when you're working on your worksheet there. And let's get 100%.